We are. Excellent. Thank you. So myself, I'm Peter Muller. I'm the Director of the Americas for Schlafender Haase. I've been in the software industry for about 25 years, working specifically in life sciences for about 12 years. And I kind of specialize in what I say, translating execu speak to techno speak and vice versa. I'm going to act as the MC for today, and Cham is going to be the main presenter. Cham Williams has more than 20 years experience in the life sciences industry, working for globally for pharmaceutical consulting and technology solution companies. He's now at IQVIA, and Cham is bridging the technology and business worlds to help design better products and help shape the next generation of RIM solutions. His expertise includes managing regulatory technology, business process optimization, and systems planning and systems implementation. And Cham does come from industry, so prior to IQVIA, he was a principal consultant advising clients on regulatory strategy and process development. And he's actually started his career at GSK, where he was part of a submissions team that pioneered and was recognized for submitting electronic CRFs, and that later led to the development of electronic NDAs. So he's got a wealth of experience in this field. Next slide, please, Cham.
Sure.
And Schlafender Haase, the company that I work for, we offer, we're the sponsor of today's event, and we offer a suite of tools called TVT that allow life sciences companies to ensure regulatory submission, labeling, artwork, and marketing ad promo content is correct and published correctly. We've been sponsoring the RAPS community for over 10 years, so you're probably familiar with us through RAPS Convergence, the local chapter events, and webinars such as today's event on effective labeling management. So we'd like to thank you today for attending, and without further ado, I will hand it over to Cham.
Thank you, Peter. So just to quickly let you know, I'm actually, yes, with IQVIA, and for the last several years, we've been integrating our knowledge of healthcare and data science expertise to build better solutions for, from clinical to commercial. We're also, moving towards, as I said, as Peter said, creating technological solutions to bridge and move us forward, in the future. Our deep domain expertise in healthcare across diseases, geographies, and scientific methods turns regular data science into something much more valuable. I think that's how we like to view it. But just to get into what we're going to be discussing today. Today's topic, effective labeling and management, requires a new mindset. It's a strategic guide to label process optimization. And so today, I hope to provide a guidance for those of you involved in your organization's attempt to formulate an end-to-end process for labeling. And so this presentation will attempt to create a framework for asking the right questions when approaching the components of an end-to-end solution, as well as establish a common, comprehensive executive view of the overall process. So it's not a matter of providing all of the answers, but a view into how you should approach and view the end-to-end process related to labeling. So what's driving the current landscape of labeling? I mean, why are we at this complex, the state of a complex web of interconnections and handoffs within labeling? And would say over the last 20 years, the evolution of regulations and industry standards to meet the increase in the complexity of products has led to agencies evolving their own guidances to meet that increased use of technology with respect to being able to consume review and take a look at the information related to these drug products. And what we're seeing is that as uh, agencies started to recognize this new technology, and we moved from a paper-based submission process to an electronic-based submission process, the need to capture electronic data, to categorize it, and be able to quickly move it through the process has significantly increased. I remember back in 95, 96, driving a U-Haul truck from Philadelphia to the FDA offices in DC to submit hundreds of boxes with, thousands of volumes, probably millions of pages of electronic submission. Back in those days when you had to submit seven versions of one volume that went out to the different offices. And yes, at that time we started submitting CRFs in electronic format, but we're still capturing data and moving data through from a paper, at least in a paper base, but grabbing that information and starting to pull it electronically and saying, how do we maintain and capture that information and move it towards the agencies? And so out of that, a comprehensive approach developed, which is what we kind of see ourselves in when we say regulatory information management. We started to see concepts like field attributes and metadata, workflows and document life cycles that have now become the normal lexicon and expectation about how you capture information. At the same time, while these authorities were making these requirements from a regulatory perspective, it seems as though labeling authorities also saw this need to, mirror or capture their information in the same way. But that technology that originally grew out of regulatory information management and a strategic view of capturing that information and creating these solutions didn't occur in the same way with labeling. We saw more of a fractured approach where the technology already existed and companies in their need to respond to labeling requirements started essentially manipulating these RIM solutions and creating these RIM Frankensteins that met specific needs for labeling. So it wasn't a strategic approach to it, but just an ad hoc, grab the best technology that can meet our needs, whether that's meant grabbing something off the shelf and manipulating it, or creating something in-house to meet these needs. And so, once they did all of this, then now you have this conglomerate, this ocean of solutions that work well in their silos, and they were essentially stitched together to form this complex web, but with no real strategic overview. So what were the needs that these solutions were trying to meet? When you think about it, they were essentially just responding to questions. As those questions and those requirements came up from agencies, they quickly found ways to meet those guidances and to provide that information. Things such as I need to ensure labeling data is consistent across the organization. Okay, so let's create a core document. What solutions do we have for creating a document? Is this as simple as a Word document and something that just maintains our company stance on this product? How do I track changes in labels? The agency says they want to see the changes in these labels, but they didn't tell us how they want it. Am I doing a markup on a Word document? So okay, let's go find a solution that does this for us. The agency agencies came and said SPLs or anything where they want to see an XML and associated JPEGs. Okay, is there an XML author available? Let's go out and find somebody who can help us convert our content to XML, package it, and send it off. And individually, these are all excellent responses. But at the same time, organizations also have to think about remaining compliant. Interpreting those guidances in whichever way that they're presented to them to, in the quickest and most effective way in order to ensure the best chance of getting approval efficiently. At the end of the day, quality is essential. Bad data in means bad data out. So no matter what your method is, you have to ensure the quality of the information in your labeling systems. As the world shrinks and markets expand, companies operate across the geographic and functional domains, the need to make that information consistent and accessible is driving the globalization of the industry. And so in response, the developers of technology solutions are recognizing that by harmonizing the components of their systems and services across all functions, that and that's being demanded by the customers. This is a way that, because you want to be able to access information at any point along the life cycle. So these are things that are all impacting the needs of today's labeling management. So what do we mean by effective labeling management? And how do we optimize this process? If we look at the statement, labeling process optimization should establish a high-level framework for managing the key aspects of and if you leave this out, end-to-end process, that in itself is sufficient. You do want to manage all the aspects of an end-to-end process. But with the impact of technology over the last 20 years, we have to insert that statement that says technology appropriate and scalable process. The changes in technology means that things are always changing. How are you positioned to accept and deal with those changes? And is the technology you have actually appropriate for your size, for your maturity? And so the labeling process itself, it stretches across your organization. And without that comprehensive strategic view, business units, they're going to adopt their own solutions for their specific needs. Regulatory will grab their own RIM systems and publishing systems. Manufacturing will probably start thinking about their artwork management and systems towards the end of the process. You have change control systems. And so, many mature organizations have already begun to then interrogate this labeling process from the strategic view. But what you find with those mature and even less mature organizations is that they've tended to neglect to really look at the appropriate solutions and to make sure that they're also thinking about the technological architecture that allows them to scale as needed. You don't need the biggest and the best in the beginning. You may start with the small, but having considered the wider implications that you're able to then, as systems come on, you then change and increase. And I speak to, years ago, I was with a pharmaceutical firm, and we were implementing a labeling management system. They were already creating the labels, just through authoring. And the organization felt that, we need to be able to categorize, classify, organize all of this information. And part of it, that meant that you were able to bring in information. But what wasn't considered was the fact that the organization was already going through its own RIM transformation. And so you had multiple sources of data, and they needed to find a way to organize that so that there was a single point of truth or an effective way of moving information in. And so without taking that into consideration, the labeling solution, while by itself was impressive, it failed. It didn't work because they didn't take into account the multiple sources of information that the users would have to go out to capture that information and then to bring it back into this labeling solution. So there was that disconnect. It wasn't even as simple as a handoff at that point because the main functionality that you were gaining from the system was now negated. So at the same time, what factors then also affect this product labeling? Companies are trying to adhere to self-imposed standards. They're also, they're making sure that what they're provided meets the public health and safety requirements. That's implicit. That's not even something that we really need to think about. But at the same time, because the labeling process touches so many areas along the product development, safety, quality, regulatory, marketing, package engineering, manufacturing, and so much more. They each have their own technology strategies in play. and they're all looking for something that meets their own needs. But the ability to clearly understand where the labeling process intersects and impacts on each of these is something that you really need to consider as you're looking at an end-to-end system. Regulatory oversight, always something that has to be considered. Those standards and regulations are always changing, and we have to respond and reflect those standards and regulations. And at the end of the day, you need a good return on investment. We can try to not admit to it, but we want to quickly capture that product-related information. We want to present that information to an authority for marketing approval, and we also want to collect the feedback to ensure the safety of our product. While at the end of the day, companies need to make money as well. So it's a reality. So with all of those that you're considering, what does a end-to-end labeling process really look like, and what are the components? We need to identify a logical start in the process and then follow what we call the quote-unquote label all the way to the end. And by identifying this process, an organization can then proceed with determining their strategic or their systematic approach, looking at all the elements and making sure that they complement each other, that they hand off properly, that they are in sync. The industry has established standards that make this process consistent at a high level. And so it really is just trying to understand where in this process, the maturity of this process relative to an organization. And so at that point, then you're able to determine the best fit. And labeling is complex. By no means am I saying it's a straightforward linear process. There's lots of overlap. There's iterative sub-processes that take place. But what this is an attempt to simplify the process in order to find a structure that can be executively managed. So if we look at the industry standards, we recognize that there are three main functions or components within end-to-end labeling. There's the change management area, the content management, and the implementation management of labels. But we also need to be fine-tuningly aware of the stakeholders and the technology involved. And so, over the next few slides, it's not as much that I'm going to be providing you solutions as to, okay, now that you look at it and you step back and you take this 20,000-foot view, within these areas, what are you really asking, and what are the things that you need to take into account when moving towards an end-to-end solution? So the first area is our change management. And in this component, we're looking at change control, the data, how we manage that data, and how we move that data towards submissions, or at least planning for submissions. And so here we want to identify, especially during change control, labeling change control, the processes and the technology utilized to gather and capture product and safety related information. Is this information accessed remotely? Are they at the level of the labs where you then have to go out and collect information from lab books or in that sense, especially early in the process? Or is that information being moved to a central collection, a central location early in the process that is stored there and easily accessible to anybody who needs to get to that information before even thinking about trying to get market authorization? So you're looking at whether this is called core or global. Are you storing it at that level, or are you moving it down to a local level? How are your changes being approved and the accuracy of the data validated? Some organizations maintain separate change control systems, or is that change control maintained, or you intend to include that change control in your end-to-end system, that you're looking at the triggers, looking at the planning that needs to take place, identifying timelines and tasks? Is that going to be a part of your end-to-end system, or is that something that is being fed into your system? And then once you move on to the actual management of that data, once you've gathered and validated at the global level how this information, how do you intend to then segregate this information and prepare it for local use? You have your concept of your global information. How is that now segregated and separated and distributed to your local affiliates, and how are they consuming that information? Once changes are initiated, how are those communicated? How are they assessed? And how are they validated to be considered that you need to move forward with these changes? And then how do you distribute that down to the impacted stakeholders? These are things that you definitely have to be, to consider within your end-to-end solution. And then how does a business itself hold itself responsible for planning the implementation of those changes while balancing their agency requirements? You need to track these changes across multiple stakeholders and authorities, and you have to do this in a timely manner. And this could either be managed from a top down, where headquarters are distributing the information down to sites and affiliates, or changes may be initiated locally, and you need to have a mechanism for managing those local changes while feeding those changes back to the core information or to other markets that are related. And then at the end of the day, what's the feedback loop for improving the process? How are you reporting are you meeting your deadlines? Are there efficiencies to be gained? Business intelligence is by far something that is rising amongst the industry right now, and something that is very important to establishing efficiencies. So to that, I think let's take a break from me just talking, and we start with our first poll question.
Okay.
Go ahead, Peter. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was going to say, so the first poll question we have is, before you develop a core data sheet, how are you tracking the data, or looking to just get a general idea of how everyone is tracking that data? Is it through Word documents or other types of documents just stored on network folders? Do you have a LIM system? Do you have a RIM system? Are you gathering the data that just before market authorization, or is it provided to you by someone else that may hold the patent on it? So I think you just click that, and we'll see the answers here shortly. And the poll stays open for a minute or two, and then we'll close it.
This is Joanne. We have about 40% of the votes in right now.
Perfect. Okay, excellent. So we can see the results. So most of the people, a large majority, is just in Word documents. So no kind of structured system or technology to help manage that, Cham.
Oh, wow. Well, so then let's then take a look at that content generation then, because that sounds to be like we have quite a few people who are definitely interested in an end-to-end solution and capturing information in a much more structured manner, not just in Word documents. Let's see, is this, there we go. So around that content generation then, I mean, you start with that label data, but you're also using that label data that you've confirmed through the change management process, and you're using that to generate content to be used at both the core level as well as for local labeling. So, as you said, if you're capturing your information in Word documents, how is that information coming into those documents? Is this somebody just going out and, asking for the information, coming back and typing it in? Are you using things such as, with new technology, things which templates aren't new technology, but it still is in some situations establish templates that makes it easier for you to know exactly where to go in and enter this information that you've captured. There's lately the use of structured content, where while it's a Word document, it's broken down into smaller pieces, and those individual pieces are managed separately, so that information coming from clinical, they can manage that piece, whereas information coming from safety is managed separately. They go through their own iterations, their own changes, but everything comes together in this one document. So it makes it that much easier to manage that information, instead of one person trying to go out and capture all of this information. And even more recently is there's a concept of that automatic ingesting of content and data. If you already have information, or you have information that's been made available to you, can that information be automatically imported, scanned, or electronically? The content is then essentially observed or interrogated, and out of this content, metadata and fields are automatically picked up, and that information is then captured in your system. So in that sense, you don't have to go out and look for this data. That data comes in the form of lab notes or something to that effect, that you quickly pick up product information, safety information, populate your data, and you can then repurpose that information in generating your content. But at the same time, are you pulling information from multiple different systems to create this label-specific content? Are you pulling from RIM systems, from LIM systems, or CROs that provided information? So you want to make sure that your label content, the integration is properly aligned and accounted for. This moves us to content validation. What one entity calls a product, another entity may see it as a product family. So is that consistent? Does that consistency exist? Because you'll be repurposing data across multiple locations. And so there's going to be the potential for differences, even at the local level, how things are called. And so we want to establish within your end-to-end consistency across your content. And consistency across taxonomy is implicit, and I think most people are aware of this. You'd be very surprised, even within labeling, if you leave it to if there isn't as much control, there's multiple different ways of writing the manufacturer's name and address. And even when, and I go back to that time when we were updating that labeling system, and we said, well, who are your manufacturers? The same manufacturer is written multiple times by different people. And so now it makes it that much more difficult. If you're not providing that consistency or those standards, people are going to enter it their own way. Retrieving that data now becomes that much more difficult, because you're trying to figure out which of these is the company I'm looking for, which is the correct one, even though they all look the same. And then, based on what you get from agencies, organizations are always searching for the best solutions to meet some of that guidance. And I always speak to the one that there's guidance that says, provide us with the changes in the label, but it doesn't tell you exactly how. And so we've seen things have evolved, such as markup versions versus clean versions, or some people just provide a list of, hey, this is what changed. So there's that need to validate that content, and how are you, or what's the best way to meet this kind of guidance. Just because the industry has always done it a specific way doesn't mean that it's the way that works for you, or it's the way to go forward. So while you may not have the leverage to change the solutions that are being brought to you, it allows you to ask the questions that that speak to your process, so that well, why should I think that this works for me? It works for everybody else, but what works for me? And how can we make sure that in order to meet these requirements and expectations, that the functionality that you're providing fits to my needs? So you've through all of that, now how do you confidently identify what is in review versus what is being approved by authorities. You've captured all your information, you've gone through your versioning, you've gotten to a point where you're ready to submit to agencies. But how do you know what's sitting at the agency and what's approved? And I think especially as labeling, we know that there are a lot of situations where labels are going through review, whereas while there are supplements, there are changes taking place before the label has been approved. How are you managing the things of this nature? How do you know? How do you bring everything back to, well, now that the agency has approved this, how do I consolidate this back to the current document that I need to be following? So there's a need for managing branching and version trees in that sense. And again, we come back to that RIM-related taxonomy that we now take as normal. And if you have slight differences in different markets, how do you account for these differences? How do we deal with deviations and manage changes if the central global core information changes? How do you intend to distribute that information? Is that automatic? Is that somebody has to then go in and do an assessment at each and every level to see what the deviations will be? And of course, is English your first language? Then if your affiliates and sites are a different language, how are translations being managed? Are they being managed locally, without even reflecting those changes that are required locally back to the source information? Or is it always done at the source and then translated? So there's a lot of things that we really have to consider. And I'm sure these are all things that are considered, but a lot of times these things are all considered in silos and not a part of the overall framework and what available technology you have to you. And so I think at this point, again, I think we have another poll question that ask you some information around that.
Yeah, so just interested to see what everyone's experiences are with an error or kappas. Are these common problems that you're seeing, that information's missing from a core data sheet? Have you missed your response deadlines? Is there a general lack of workflow control out there that led to an error or a kappa? Content not being aligned, as Cham was mentioning, between the global level or the HQ level and the local level, or are there other kinds of things that are causing pain and problems in the process? And we see the results coming in. Okay, so interesting, pretty even across the board, about a third, A, C, and D.
A, C, and D. From the core data sheet. Okay, interesting. Okay then, so then let's move to implementation management. So I think historically this has been the area that has gotten the least amount of focus, and this is probably because it probably resides in the manufacturing area of your organization, and it's just seen as, well, we handed it off and we no longer need to think about it. But when you really do think about it, you need to consider if there's a seamless transition of that approved content to your label artwork department, that for content distribution. This may seem trivial, but it's very easy that if you're just walking that content over to your artwork department, that you're not aware of changes that have been made to a label. Those changes are coming, pretty fast these days, especially with generics. And so your artwork goes off and is generating label images, etc. But they're working from yesterday's approved document when today a new version exists and they're not aware. How responsive is your labeling to holes due to label issues, even at the factory level or the warehouse level. You know, that you find an issue with a label, it's about to be put on material, and an issue is found and a hole is put in. How quickly does that information get back through the labeling process so that you don't have thousands of labels sitting in the corner of a warehouse somewhere? And which version of the content does marketing consume? And they're always in position of the latest label. Well, I'm here repeating what I said a while ago, but this is, you know, also goes down to marketing, not just the artwork, because artwork may go to the printing of labels, whereas marketing is capturing that content for not the labels themselves, but for information, for promotional material that needs to go out. And are they also getting the latest version and making sure that they are up to date? And you know, there's for labeling implementation, there are things that it may seem small in the grand scheme of things, but being able to ensure that the content that you get from the source content, are you able to compare that source content with the received content changes to ensure consistency as you transfer it to artwork? So there's the changes that occur between the actual content. How are you able to compare an old, you know, a previous label to the changes that need to come down the line? And then now when you get to the artwork, how are you able to compare what you have in hand as the current label to the new changes that need to be made? It's not so easily understood when you receive the new current label, but you can't quickly identify what needs to be changed from an artwork perspective. And this also applies to the actual labels that are generated. They are generated from electronic, usually from electronic sources. And so that source goes out to the printer and it gets printed. But when it comes back, are we ensuring that it's actually printing what was expected? Our colors, are the simple thing, are our colors correct? Are our spaces and pixels, are they being represented in that printed output properly? And so there's, you know, these are technologies, or this is technology that you do need to think about when incorporating an end-to-end solution that you wouldn't readily think of, but it ensures that there's that consistency of the label content through what is generated all the way through the life cycle. Sorry. So I think, again, we have one more poll question with respect to that.
Okay. And this one is not a poll that we're going to post because there's probably too many responses in terms of, you know, if you're using an art management system, are you, you know, using one of the common brand names out there? There's maybe 14, 15, 16 different systems out in the marketplace. So we're asking that you maybe post just a quick answer in the chat if you're using a specific vendor to provide an artwork management system, or is it something that you've, you know, built yourselves, added on to a larger document management system, again, just using, you know, network, you know, a network folder structure. And so if you can just quickly type your answer in the chat, we'll see if this, if we're able to get some information that way.
The responses are coming in through the questions.
Through the questions. Okay, I understand. I see. Okay, so can you see in there, Cham? There's a lot of different responses. We do see some vendors, but we do see a lot of, you know, in-house system, network folder structure, nothing, document management. We see some RIM systems in there that are being used for artwork management. We see quality control systems, so it's quite a hodgepodge of things.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have expected to see so much. Interesting. Okay.
that is interesting. So, so as we come so we've gone through those components, but there are things that there are two more things that we need to consider when looking at an end-to-end system. First and foremost, stakeholders. We've seen that the labeling process goes across a very wide area of the company through domains and functionalities. Product information is collected from clinical and quality and safety. Regulatory generates content and it manages submissions and communicates authorizations. Content is distributed for artwork and marketing, and labels are actually printed for containers, for packaging. And at the same time, even legal scrutinizes the wording that goes out to limit their liability. IT is involved in terms of all of these disparate systems, managing and supporting them, as well as there's the system owners around these systems. And so identifying and engaging all of these stakeholders as early as possible is needed to ensure that all needs are considered from a process perspective, but also from a technology perspective, because they themselves have within their silos have their own technology solutions that they're working with. And so whether or not it's, are theirs complementary? Do they integrate well? Or can they be repurposed? Or, okay, do we need to look at, based on the end-to-end solution, maybe recommending to them different technology to make that process more efficient? And so this leads us to, the actual technology itself, the systems architecture planning. And as you search for that appropriate solution, considerations have to be, are you looking for a single end-to-end solution that addresses all phases, but then probably requires a significant investment up front? Are you looking at what you have and pairing complementary systems so that they integrate, whether you are able to do that automatically off the bat, or if you need to manually move things from one to the next, but that movement means that it validates that movement, so that information coming out of one system, when it goes into the other, there are procedures that make sure that that remains consistent in that transfer. How do your systems integrate with the wider company architecture, given that labeling spans a wide range of domains? And I see from your responses, it could be that your processes are too complicated for off-the-shelf software. And so you've had to maintain in-house systems that are in themselves difficult to maintain or expensive to maintain. And as industry requirements change or technology changes, you're having to go back and audit your in-house systems from start to begin to make sure that they are meeting these new technology requirements or expectations. So, in essence, you really wanted to step back and say, are there opportunities for sharing technology along this framework, along this life cycle, across domains, and instead of everybody staying in their own silos and just coming out with the thing that serves their specific needs the best. And so I think we're at our last question, which is not necessarily a poll question, but Peter.
Yeah, again a question, because there's so many different vendors and ways of approaching this. To answer in the chat, we're just trying to get an idea if people have RIM systems in place, or if they're not using anything, or similar to the last question. So again, as we see the answers coming in, there's a lot of again varied responses to this.
That's quite interesting. I was expecting a little more consistency, so the industry isn't as consolidated as people think. So, you know, as we come to the end of this presentation, and you know, I do realize, as much as I've said to you, you know, we need to look at it from a different perspective, from, you know, a 20,000-foot view, that this framework inherently leaves you with as many questions as answers. But that is the intent. You know, have you stepped back and look at it from this perspective and not from your silo or close perspective? And have you been asking the right questions as you've moved through the evolution of your labeling? You know, have your answers been from a perspective of seeing the entire picture? You've probably been in search of solutions for your specific needs as they arose, and have you then ignored the entire perspective? And you know, so this is this new approach, I said, is not groundbreaking. It's nothing that all of a sudden, you know, I came up with something great, but it just felt as though labeling tended to be quite myopic, and it overlooked the needs of all of the stakeholders, whether they're direct or indirect. And that, I think, to a point, we've neglected to consider all of our technology options, not just the ones that we are inherently aware of because of the work that we do day in and day out. And then, you know, when you step back, you want to also make sure that as an organization, are you mature enough to sustain the solutions that you're identifying? I know I said at the beginning, there's probably a best out there that, you know, wows you, but are you ready to implement that and use that? Or is that something that you can wait on and make sure that you incrementally move your organization to this strategic framework and view of labeling? Oh, I think there is one more. There is one more question.
Okay, and this is more of a traditional poll, and we're just trying to get an idea of, you know, some of the information that Cham presented, which is your biggest concern at the moment. So that will be launched as a poll now. And we should see that come up soon. There we go. And we'll give it a,
Yeah, see, it's
there, about a third, a third, a third.
Yeah, it's pretty evenly distributed.
Yeah, we have about half the votes have come in, and we'll give folks just a few seconds to submit more responses, and then we'll close it down.
Okay.
All righty. There's the results, final results there.
Yeah, it's somewhat distributed, right? I can see a little bit of an edge for implementation, and again, I can understand that, because that tends to be we handed it off and we didn't really have to worry about it again until you need us to hand off a new version. So, so at this point, we want to welcome any questions that have come out of this discussion. Is there anything that amongst yourselves you'd like to discuss, or even to challenge? I mean, this is how we make these approaches better. That, there may be assumptions that I've made that are not inherently correct. So, even before saying reach out to us later, is there anything that we'd like to ask or discuss at this point?
Yeah, I was going to say, so thanks a lot for the information, Cham. It's as we know, it's a very complex topic with a lot of moving pieces, and I think you did a great job of providing us with a framework and some of the areas we can improve upon, and I think if nothing else, given us a lot of things to think about. So thanks again for sharing your experience and expert advice here. I'm going to go through and see if there's some some questions that we can begin to address. And if we don't get to your questions, because there's actually a lot of questions, we'll try to follow up with you following the webinar and answer some of those questions. So jumping right in, I say the first one. Chem, we have a question where where do you recommend starting the labeling optimization process?
So I think, again, if we step back and look at it, not from your immediate needs, then I think as an organization, the best way to do it is to, conduct some form of gap analysis against your current processes. Start with the simplest thing of, what do we need to accomplish? What are your user requirements? And if you do that, not at a solution level, but at a business process level. And then you look at your current systems and say, how much of our user requirements or business requirements are being met by our system? What are the gaps? And on the same time, a similar thing with your infrastructure. If you map out your system infrastructure and you look at it across the full labeling continuum, what are the dependencies? If you map it out and say, well, what solutions are used at what point along the continuum? What are the handoffs, and are they inherently inefficient or efficient at this point? And where can you consolidate? Where does complementary or other technology reside within your organization that that you can then repurpose and align that technology within your organization? So I think those are I would recommend as the first point that you'd start at.
Okay, and I guess something kind of related to that is, are there any quick wins that we can quickly or rapidly implement?
What I could say, yes, and I think that's something that everybody will say, well, what can we quickly? Because you're trying to show return on investment, even to management. I think the problem is that that's the trend that brought us to this state now that we have these fractured solutions. If we instead focus on establishing that larger framework, and then we hone in on the components, then that show the least risk to implementation versus greatest reward, then you start to identify those quick wins. But just saying, oh, let's just make sure that our artwork is well. Yes, that's good, but in its silo, that's excellent. But what's the impact on the larger framework?
Okay, good. And are there any reading materials that you can recommend on this topic?
No, I don't know if I can necessarily recommend specific reading materials, but I'd continue. I suggest to you to the listeners to interact with our peers and discuss these solutions at conferences such as DIA's Global Labeling, or I think here in Philadelphia there's that the Pharma Packaging Labeling Conference, RSIDM, or even through these webinars. They're excellent forums, and I would say within those forums, it's just to insist that the discussions are not around just guidance and the business process itself, but to also ask for discussions around the technology solutions from a wider perspective, and not just have the vendors turn up and show you, this is our great software and this does this specific thing well, but you're not having those discussions about where that specific solution fits in your overall process.
Okay, and then we have a couple questions around, are there any systems that can be recommended, or, does IQVIA or Schlafender offer solutions in this space?
So I don't want to take this as an opportunity to try and, advertise any system. I really do want to, especially people, to step outside and think about their needs before looking at the solutions. It's something that I'm sure Schlafender and IQVIA, we are looking at this from this overarching perspective and thinking, what is the best approach to providing solutions to organizations? And that may not be providing the one solution fits everything. It may be providing a piece of it, but again, are we also looking at the framework, and then making sure that the part that we are addressing in that framework is complementary to all the other pieces. So disappointing as it may seem, I really do not want to at this point say, oh no, you should look at this software or that software.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. Are there any kind of specific challenges with having, a cloud solution versus on-premise solution?
From a technology perspective, I think one of the main things is, I think people's comfort level for cloud systems, making sure that, that initial auditing of security around cloud systems is something that's quite important for users. I think beyond that, it really does come down to connectivity and access. And I think that's what it's trying to address in terms of you're just moving the system away from a local implementation to an implementation that everybody has access to. So from a user perspective, it's much easier, it's much more accessible. From a technology perspective, it's scary because of how much more open you are and how much more work you have to do up front to ensure the to ensure the security of your information as it's out there. But those are the only things I usually see differences. It's where it's hosted. It's not the solution itself. It's how that solution is hosted and how you're ensuring security and safety for data.
Yeah, I think that goes with some things we've seen too of the general security mindset of different companies. You have different cultures that are very open to using cloud solutions, and others which don't want to have anything out there on the web or in the cloud. So I think it's more a company specific preference. How do they manage that? We have two questions that are very similar. So it pertains to, how do smaller companies that don't have any kind of labeling or infrastructure processes in place, how should they look at beginning these processes?
Yeah, so if you don't have anything, you're operating as it is now, maybe not ideal. I would say before even thinking about going out and grabbing technology is doing that form of analysis, having whether it is a consultant firm or something of that effect that says come in and we want you to look at our labeling process, and we don't want you to just look at it from the perspective of how do I create my label and move it out. You want them to look at your entire process from where is my information starting, how do I have access to that information, and what's the movement of that information throughout the entire process, and looking at it in that way and coming back to you and saying, here's your information, here are your stakeholders, here are the things that you need to consider when it comes to your solutions to meeting this process. And then at that point now, as a small organization, you can then take that information and say, okay, I'm going to approach somebody, can they meet everything? Quite unlikely. Of these things, where's the risk, where's the reward, that's where you start looking at what's the quick wins, but you're implementing quick wins with a view to, well, yes, this is a quick win in this situation, but I already know that this is going to complement the solution that I need at another point in this continuum. So I think that overall process evaluation is necessary before even thinking about trying to implement specific solutions at different intersections in that framework.
Okay. And then perhaps a final question. It relates to, so I'll read out the question, but perhaps rephrase it as well. It says, do you have any recommendations for structured systems that can bridge the silos? So maybe not so much in a tech, like a vendor perspective, but maybe either a system or a process. How do you actually bridge those silos?
So, if we think of you coming out of change management silo, so however you approach your change management, if it's an external system to your labeling content system, what's the information that's coming out of that system? What are the triggers for changes? Who are the owners who's impacted by those changes? You're trying to make sure that kind of information is, and I'm sure it is as part of your change control process, is captured currently. How do you then move that information over to your content systems with the appropriate product-related data so that it gets, even if it's not integrated automatically, manual ingestion makes it easier to moving it over to your content generation systems. And then you go through your content generation through whatever systems you're using there, and you end up with output that, again, you're now thinking, how do I make sure that the information that I need to move forward to implementation, from that in itself is much more content related. How is that information transferred to label implementation? How am I making sure that the version or how current that information and the responsiveness of these, I think, is also very important to make sure that as changes come down, something that is already in process gets quickly stopped and the new change gets implemented, and that we're not going so far down that we're wasting resources working on something that is at that point obsolete.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so as we're coming to the close of this, you can see both Cham and my contact information on screen. If you have any further questions or you want to continue the conversation, please feel free to reach out to us. If we can't answer your questions, we both know many folks in the industry, and we can at least point you in the right direction.